Welcome back, Saints fans. Still no intro, because Brian's lazy. Um, jokes aside, so this show is going to be the start of a little mini series that I'm going to be doing. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at least two position groups each show. Um, One on offense, one on defense, and I'm going to give my impressions based on how I feel about those groups right now. This is going to be a little bit different than what I did the last episode, where I was really looking at more big picture vision, what I think the team is going to do, what I think gives them the best chance for success. Um, in this case, I'm really just looking at players. And so it's important for me to point that out, and I'll probably point it out each time just as a reminder. You can have average or even below average players, and if you have enough good players around them and you have the right scheme, you can still have a lot of success. Doesn't mean it's highly likely, doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but it's absolutely possible, and it's not that infrequent that it happens in the NFL. So, just to get started with that, let's take a look at the first two positions we're going to look at here. One of which is the tight end group. So that's going to be our offensive position. So the tight end group is, as of today, being that, obviously the offseason isn't done and, you know, UDFAs and other transactions can happen. But you have Adam Troutman, you have Nick Vanette, Garrett Griffin, Ethan Wolf, and Dylan Soner. By the way, the source I'm using for this, Nick Underhill on New Orleans Football, put out a depth chart article. It has each of the positions on it, so I know there's a bunch of other trackers out there. Just if anybody's checking against this, or if I miss somebody, that's why. Just being totally transparent. But anyway, taking a look at the tight end group. So here is my we'll look at high level, and then I'll I'll talk about the players I know. My high level opinion of the tight end group is this. I think it's the worst group on the roster talent wise, pending us getting to see Adam Troutman in year two. Um, Adam Troutman showed some very interesting flashes as a rookie. Um, he didn't put together those flashes consistently. He also wasn't really asked to, and frankly, with the way the end of the season went, I would have honestly have much rather had Adam Troutman out there running those routes and trying to catch the ball than Jared Cook's terrible trash ass. Um, I will always forever hate him for those two plays that he didn't make, or made if you're Tampa Bay. Um, but regardless, he showed some. Here's the attributes I like about Troutman. Obviously, he's tight end sized, so he's got a good sized body. He's got well proportioned frame. He's built like a tight end, which is important. But beyond just the no shit, Brian aspects of it, probably my single favorite thing about Adam Troutman is the fact that he is a fluid athlete. And a lot of guys at that position, and just large humans in general, um, not always the most agile of individuals. And that's really, really important at the tight end position. A, because it's a position traditionally defined by versatility, but also if you're going to run routes, if you're going to be a passing threat, if you're going to be a component of the offense that can line up in multiple places and do multiple things and work the middle of the field, you have to be able to move in space. And if you can't, you're Josh Hill. If you go way back in the day when we traded Jimmy Graham, one of the things Sean mentioned is if you look at Josh Hill's testing, he was awesome. And that was accurate. If you looked at the testing numbers Josh Hill should have been a star tight end. Now, Josh Hill was an awesome player for the Saints. He was, one of those lunch pail guys. I'm not demeaning Josh Hill by any reasons. I'm also not overly pumping him up because to me, there's actually a very simple reason why Josh Hill never became more than he was, even though he had the physical attributes to be able to. And that is that fluidity. You know, term loose hips will get thrown around. There's a lot of different ways to describe it, but it's at a again at a high level, especially for a large human. Do you have the ability to shift your momentum while moving naturally from one side of your body to another in order to make cuts, to transition in space, and to, by effect, create separation and create opportunities for passes? That leads us kind of to the second component that comes off from that, and another thing I do like about Troutman, in limited reps, obviously that he had at it, and limited opportunities, he seems to have good hands, and that's really really important. Um, the fact that he can move well, that he can start and stop, that he can shift his momentum, that he can do some of those things, just doing them at all, even though we only saw them in limited stretches. The fact that he can do those and that he can catch well gives me hope. So when I say that the tight end group is the worst group on the roster, I say that with the caveat of we don't know if he will be what he hypothetically could be, and that would certainly change the evaluation. But I don't make evaluations, and I don't think teams should, given a choice, based on could be's. I'm a big believer of I would rather have a really high floor than a really high ceiling as a general trend on my roster. Obviously, you need a few super high ceiling guys because you need stars. But stars are stars because they have a very high floor and a even higher ceiling. Alvin Kamara is a great example of that. Mike Thomas is a great example of that. Mediocre Mike is still a pretty damn good receiver. He's just not Mike good. And that's the difference. Is those star players, a bad game for them is probably a fairly good game, or even a normal game, at worst a normal game for most players. Do I think Troutman has star potential? Tight end's a tricky position. It can take a couple of years, and then all of a sudden guys look great, and then some guys look awesome right away. You never really know with that position until you know. He's got a lot of attributes where he could be a real weapon in this offense, especially if the offense is more vertical. Some of that underneath stuff is going to open up. He showed some real after the catch ability. Again, moves well in space. So, are there reasons to be positive about Adam Troutman? Yeah. Do I expect him to be good enough to carry that position for it to be a plus as a position group? No, I don't expect that. I wouldn't be shocked if it happened, but I certainly don't expect it. That is not what I would call the most likely outcome, which is what I consider an expectation. The most likely outcome is he'll be somewhere in the 300 to 500 yard range, maybe 2 to 4 touchdowns, decently productive, have a nice sophomore season, but certainly not be a stud, and you'll get next to nothing, production-wise, from the rest of the players in the group. So, Nick Vanette, he's a signing. He is primarily there to be a blocker. Um, and I don't see him coming out and being more than that. That doesn't mean he can't. We're just talking expectations here. Garrett Griffin is the best kept secret that'll never do anything on the Saints roster. Makes a couple plays every camp, makes a couple plays in preseason. Some members of Saints Twitter will, oh yeah, this guy, or a coach will talk about him, but he's not going to do anything. I frankly know nothing about Ethan Wolf and Dylan Soner, and if you tell me that you do, unless you watched that player in college, I don't believe you, because there's really not a lot we need to know, and that's kind of the point. Is there's not a single proven commodity in that group, other than maybe Vanette as a blocking tight end, but that's in today's game. That's your secondary, player. That's an ancillary piece to the offense. It's a nice to have. It's not a need to have. You really do need a player who can be an actual pass catching tight end, preferably a do it all guy. Like everybody would like to have Travis Kelsey, who you know I do still think is the best tight end in football. Um, but regardless, yeah, it's not a confidence building position, but obviously repeating myself here, that is definitely with the caveat of Troutman has shown some flashes and some potential and could really be something, and it wouldn't shock me if he ends up being a valuable contributing player and a damn good value for a third round pick. I'm just not counting on it. So now we're going to look at the first defensive position. And so the first defensive position I'm going to look at here, it's actually my favorite position on defense, just in football. It's also, I think it's the worst unit on the defense for the Saints. Um, there is a caveat to that one as well, which we'll get into as we go into later episodes, and I'll talk a little bit about today. But that is the linebackers. So the linebacking group. Before I kind of get into each of these guys, or at least the guys we know, as I kind of talked about the draft, the players that matter. Um, Linebacker to me it's not as hyped up as it used to be, but I still think it's arguably the most the three most important positions, the two most important positions on a team are number one corner and your top pass rusher, because it's a passing league, and if you can defend the other team's best receiving weapon and you can put pressure on and impact the quarterback negatively, it changes things for your defense. So that goes without saying. However, um, you'll never see a great defense that doesn't have really, really good linebacker play. And a lot of that just comes down to geometry. Linebackers can do everything from rush the passer on blitzes and scheme rushes, to covering the flats, to making tackles, on the short areas of the field, to jamming or messing up routes or screwing up timing, to calling out defenses. Um, the linebacker, again, just from a geometrical perspective, is the heart of the defense. That whole unit, obviously, the middle linebacker traditionally, being, the true so-called heartbeat, John Vilma, that type. But just as a group, I mean, it's fat. Ideally, it's fast, twitched up athletes knocking the crap out of people. It's my favorite position on defense. Um, they also have to be really smart. They make a lot of impact plays. It's just an interesting position to me, and you don't hear a lot of excitement in my voice because we got one guy that I'm like really happy is on the roster. And that's Demario Davis, who has a really strong argument for being the best linebacker in football. He's been phenomenal the last few years. Um, what we have him for is absolute highway robbery. Demario is even more important and more invaluable this year, not only because of the defense, but this is the first year without Drew, and I remember, as many of us do, that 2014 locker room. That 2014 team was talented, and they had some injuries and they had some problems, but the biggest problem they had was that locker room was an absolute fucking disaster. And Drew is a great leader, was a great leader, however we want to position that. Um, but there are different types of leadership. And while Drew is a great leader and had a lot of cachet, um, I just don't. And again, I could be wrong. I'm not in the locker room, but I just don't picture Drew walking up to somebody, grabbing them by the front of their pads, and telling them, clean your shit up or you're gonna get the fuck out of here. I absolutely could see Demario Davis doing that to somebody, and I don't just mean physically. I mean he's an intense, honest, passionate guy, DeMario's not going to put up with any bullshit. And Cam is probably a better leader in the locker room than his Shucks goofy ass is on Twitter. But I also, again, I don't see Cam being the guy to grab somebody and bring that dog out of him. We've seen DeMario do the pregame stuff. You either have that guy in you or you don't. And so DeMario Davis alone is my caveat for this unit because DeMario is so damn good that if, whether it's Pete Werner or Chase Hansen or Caden Ellis, whoever's the second linebacker on the field, or Quan if he comes back and signs on a 1 year, DeMario really might be able to single-handedly make it an effective unit and make them good. He's that good. But opposite of him is nothing but a bunch of unknowns. And I'm not hyped on Pete Werner, but I've kind of said it before. If he's Turbo Shanley, the turbo being really important, but if he's Turbo Shanley, always in the right place, not making mistakes, helping keep things lined up, being the guy that can kind of be the glue that lets better players go be impact players because he's doing his damn job. If he can be that guy right from the offset, or Chase Hansen or Caden Ellis, who coaches and other people, people like Nick who cover the team have kind of hinted at of maybe being potential candidates. If any of those guys can be that player, this unit has a chance to be okay. If they can't, Demario Davis is awesome. If you're playing a standard base, there's two other linebacker positions, and there's a real possibility that it is a combined giant turd there. And at best, you're probably looking at mediocre. I mean, they took Pete Werner in the second round. He comes from Ohio State. It was a really good program. He's supposed to be a smart player. Cliches and coach's son and lunch pail guy aside, even though really most of the cliches fit him, it's standard Saints linebacker. I just my biggest issue with the linebacker group is there is nothing to rely on and nothing to trust here. So when we're talking expectations, it's really have to have any that are positive for anybody not named Demario Davis. You also notice as I've been talking through these players, I haven't mentioned Zach Bond. That's because Zach Bond is screaming bust. And I don't necessarily know if he's going to be a bust forever. I think a couple of people on Twitter have said it, and I kind of agree with it. He just screams a guy with a particular skill set who the Saints drafted, who they decided they wanted to try to get him to do things that he's not as good at. And turns out he wasn't as good at those, so he couldn't get his ass onto the field, and he'll go somewhere else, and they'll ask him to do the things that he's good at, and he's going to be really, really good. And that's first of all, that's just bad drafting. You don't draft players. I talked about this when I was talking about, why do I look at highlights when I'm looking at a draft pick? Because I want to know what they're going to look like at their best. And I want more of that. If you're not drafting with the philosophy of get them to do the things they do best as often as possible so they can be an addition to your team, you are drafting stupid. Check their last few drafts. Kind of see a trend there. So Zach Bond, I know it's only 1 year. He could certainly prove us wrong, but right now, the way the team is talking about him, the way they're talking about using him as a middle linebacker, I got a lot of skepticism. That's the nicest thing I can say there. Chase Hansen, Caden Ellis, they've guys who've flashed at camp. They've been talked about a lot. They've been hyped up, but they haven't gone on the field. So, again, expectations. What can I reasonably think is likely to happen? And what I reasonably think is likely to happen is there's going to be a lot of frustration with this unit. I'm not overly optimistic with either of these groups. Today is not a happy podcast. But you know what? Since I've covered two groups here, and I've covered two downers, and I don't want to end it on a disappointing note. So I'm gonna go to one. I'm gonna go one more group here, and this is a group I'm actually very very high on. So it's my podcast. I can do whatever I want. I'm gonna add in running backs. So let's just take a look at the running back group. Because I like to end on a positive note, and there might not be something more positive on this roster than the running back group. So the depth chart is Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, Alex Arma, he's a fullback, Dwayne Washington, Tony Jones Jr., Ty Montgomery, and Stevie Scott III. That's obviously all of today. Not all of those guys will make the roster. Arma is a fullback. Murray and Kamara are the top two guys. Dwayne Washington met as a running back at best, but special teams guy, and the Saints always find a random UDFA running back that's like pretty damn good. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints find a random UDFA quarterback who's pretty damn good. Um, but none of that really matters. Here's all you really need to know. Alex Arma's a solid fullback. He's a good player. The Saints like to have a fullback. Most of the fullbacks they've had the last several years have all been good. They know what they're doing there. No one's here for the fullback. Latavius Murray has a pretty strong case for being like the second or third best number two running back in the league. He's really, really good. He was really, really good last year. The way they're using him, I think he's going to age well, but also his running style. He's an upright runner. He's a straight line guy. He's a speed guy, but he's also a power guy. And because he's not taking a ton of wear and tear and being the main guy, I really can see him being able to be productive for another year or two without too much of a problem, as long as obviously he doesn't get hurt, and still being a valuable part of the offense. And he's good at very good at pass protection. He's a decent receiving back in the passing game. Not good, but decent, good enough. Great straight line, good at short yardage. Nice change of pace guy, and when you need to, you can give him the ball 20 times and he can do something with it. But beating around the bush aside, let's be real here. This position, the secondary, the tertiary guys, the other guys, they're good enough. It's in no way bad. Alvin Kamara, my opinion, if your definition of best player on the team is player who plays their position the best, Alvin Kamara is a top two player on this team. I think the only two guys on the team, my opinion, who have the same level of peaks that Kamara has are two tackles. I think Ramczyk and Armstead, when they're at their best, either of those guys can make an argument for being the best player in the league at their position. Mike can do it with receiver too, but it's a little bit different. Mike is a hyper specialist. Not that he can't do. There's some things he struggles with that he's not great at, but I'll get into that when I talk receiver. Just leave it with, I'm not putting down Mike in any way, and I think Mike's an incredible receiver. I don't think Mike has ever had a clear case for best receiver in the league, simply because there's a couple other guys who are the same types of receiver that he is who are better. It has nothing to do with Mike not being awesome. Mike is fucking amazing. Alvin, though, Alvin's the most complete running back in the NFL. The only back that is at or near his level is Dalvin Cook, and I would rather have Alvin Kamara than Dalvin Cook. That's not even a question for me. I would rather have Alvin Kamara than Dalvin Cook. It's that simple. Kamara's awesome. He's an incredible player. He works his ass off. He's got a great personality. From everything we know, he's great in the locker room. Amazingly productive player, and has basically Superman backpacked this team. It got talked about a little bit, but it really didn't get talked about enough. The quarterback play last season was really, really bad. Alvin Kamara basically carried that offense into the playoffs. Not single-handedly, but kind of single-handedly. Drew was not good. We know he was hurt, but Drew was not good. Taysom was pretty poor. Um, Alvin was carrying the weight. Alvin was the main guy that made everything go, and he did, and he was fantastic. So I will end this on the high note of saying while I think the tight end and linebacker might be the two worst position groups on the roster, both having caveats of they may not be as bad as we think they are, but not caveats that I'm willing to put bets on. I think running back is the best position group on the roster. Both because it's got good players with depth, but also the best player on your team, your superstar, he's in that group. And really don't need much more than that for it to be an awesome position group. So, be back probably a little bit later this week. We'll hit the next couple of position groups, and if Brian decides to go rogue again, I don't know why I'm talking about myself in the third person, but if I decide to go rogue again, I'll add a third one in, just kind of depending on how I'm feeling. But we'll just take a couple of shows, like I said, a little mini series, make our way through these position groups. Content is hard during the off season when there's not a ton to talk about. But this will be kind of a little fun exercise, and we'll probably revisit again once we're at the end of preseason, right before the regular season actually starts. Although I think that'll probably just do two shows, one offense, one defense. So hope everybody's having a good one. Hope the mothers out there, if you're listening to this, you had a good Mother's Day, and if you're not a mother, I hope your mother had a good Mother's Day. And talk to you guys soon. Hope everybody enjoyed the show. Don't forget to retweet this and share it on social media. And obviously, if you like the show, if you didn't like the show, you can tell me to kick rocks, and I'll ignore you because I don't care. I do care, but I'm a jerk, so that's how I'm going to end things. Hope everybody has a good one. Who dat? Someday to dat. We out of here.